today we're going to focus on objective number 2, using the properties of real numbers to evaluate expressions. Here are the properties of real numbers. We have the commutative property. This holds for addition or multiplication. It states that the order in which you add or multiply does not matter. The associative property also works for addition and multiplication. This one says that you can change the grouping if you're adding all the way across or multiplying all the way across. Take a look at the examples. Notice how the parentheses have changed from the left side of the equation to the right side of the equation. The next property is the identity property. The additive identity is the number 0, because when you add 0, you do not change the value of the number. The multiplicative identity is 1, because when you multiply by 1, you don't change the value of the number. Those are the identity properties. The inverse properties, the additive inverse is the opposite of the number. When you add a number and it's negative, you're going to get 0. They cancel each other out in a sense. So a plus negative a equals 0. Multiplicative inverses, you can also think of these as reciprocals. So if you take a times 1 divided by a, or a times 1 over a, you're going to get 1. When you multiply inverses, you get back to 1. You get back to the multiplicative identity. So reciprocals multiply to give you 1. That's the multiplicative inverse. And then finally, we have the distributive property. This property kind of combines multiplying with adding or subtracting here. We should know how this one works. So you usually have a constant on the outside of parentheses or a variable or whatever, and you can distribute it through the parentheses by multiplying by both terms in the grouping symbols. So there's a few examples there. Okay, the value could be in front of the parentheses or behind the parentheses. That doesn't matter. And then you can see that if you've got a sum or a difference, your answer will stay as a sum or a difference. All right, so let's practice identifying these properties. The first equation is 5 plus 7 in parentheses plus 8 equals 8 plus 5 plus 7 in parentheses. Okay, so even though we've got parentheses here, we've got 5 and 7 grouped together, we can't automatically assume that this is the associative property. If you take a look from one side of the equation to the other, the grouping did not change. 5 and 7 are grouped on both sides of the equation, so it's not the associative property. What did change from one side to the other was the order of the numbers. And anytime you change the order of the numbers, that's the commutative property. And this one happens to be the commutative property of addition. I'm having trouble crossing my T's. Commutative. There you go. That's how you spell it. Commutative property of addition. Letter B, 2 times in parentheses x plus 3 equals 2x plus 6. Well, the only way to get this answer is to use the distributive property. Notice how the distributive property gets rid of the parentheses, because you're going to take 2 times x and 2 times 3 to get 2x plus 6. So this is the distributive. There we go, distributive property. I apologize for my handwriting. Okay, and the last one here, in parentheses, negative 8 plus 8 plus 15 equals 0 plus 15. Well, what happened here is you can see that negative 8 plus 8 was evaluated, right? Negative 8 plus 8 gives you 0. That's what changed from one side to the other. We're adding opposites here, a negative and a positive number, and we get 0. That is the additive inverse property. Additive because we're adding, right? Okay, so I'm just going to write inverse here. Additive inverse is what this property is. Okay. All right, now example 2. We need to identify the additive and multiplicative inverse for each number. This is a little tricky. Okay, so the inverse is, remember, the additive inverse is the opposite, and the multiplicative inverse you can think of as the reciprocal. Opposite and reciprocal. So we need to do 2 things here. Okay, so negative 1 3/4 is our number. The additive inverse is the opposite, so the additive inverse is positive 1 3/4. That's the additive inverse. Now the second part, we need to find the multiplicative inverse or the reciprocal. You can't find the reciprocal when you've got a mixed number like this. So we need to take -1 3/4 and convert it into an improper fraction, meaning just one fraction, okay? So to do that, you're going to take 4 times 1, that's 4. Add 3 to that, you get 7. So -1 3/4 is the same as -7/4. We're converting from a mixed number into an improper fraction. And now to find the multiplicative inverse, you just take the reciprocal, so flip it over, and we get -4/7. Okay, so the additive inverse is 1 3/4. You can check it because when you add them up, you should get 0. And the multiplicative inverse is -4/7. And you can check that. If you multiply the two numbers, you should get +1. There you go. Those are the two answers we're looking for. Let's try one more. Letter B, 1.25. Starting with the additive inverse, the opposite of this number is -1.25. That's the easy one. Oh, here's my decimal point. And to find the multiplicative inverse, you need to convert it into an improper fraction. So 1.25, think about 0.25 as a quarter, 25 cents, that's 1 1/4, right? And now you want to take this mixed number and convert it into an improper fraction. So 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5, we get 5/4, 5/4. 1.25 is the same as 5/4. Okay, so now to find the multiplicative inverse, take the reciprocal of 5/4, and the answer is 4/5. Okay, so the additive inverse is -1.25. I forgot my negative sign. -1.25, you add them up to get 0, and the multiplicative inverse is 4/5. When you multiply 1.25 times 4/5, you should get 1, and that's how you can check your answer. Okay, our last example here, we need to simplify each expression, and we're going to do that using the distributive property first and then combining like terms second. I'll show you how. Okay, so in this problem, we've got 2 times 5m plus n plus 3 times 2m minus 4n. So using the distributive property, 2 times 5m is 10m plus, now you need to take 2 times n, that's 2n, plus 3 times 2m is 6m, minus, I'm just following my symbols, 3 times 4n is 12n. Okay, so that's step 1, but we're not done because we do have some like terms. The like terms here are the variables that match. So let's start with the m's. 10m plus 6m is 16m. And then for the n's, 2n minus 12n, you need to follow the symbols in front of your numbers. 2n minus 12n gives you minus 10n. So now I've combined my like terms. M's and n's don't go together, so this is where I leave my answer. Let's try one more of those. 3 times 4x minus 2y minus 2 times 3x minus y. We need to use the distributive property again here in 2 spots. 3 times 4x is 12x minus 3 times 2y is 6y. Now when you distribute here, think of this as -2. -2 times 3x gives you -6x. So that'll tell you to use a minus sign. And then think of this as -2 times -y. A negative times a negative makes a positive 2y. Okay, and then step number 2, we're going to combine like terms, so the letters that match. Let's look at the x's. 12x minus 6x gives you positive 6x. And now if you look at the symbol in front of your letters here, if I look at the y's, I've got -6y plus 2y. That leaves me with -4y, and so I'll write minus 4y. So my answer here would be 6x minus 4y. And you leave it like this because x's and y's don't go together. Okay, now I will have you do this last slide on your own. Check your understanding here. You've got 3 examples. Name the property illustrated. Identify the additive and multiplicative inverse. and then simplify using the distributive property. Try these on your own. Bring your answers tomorrow.